This is the vocabulary breakdown for Chapter 1. In this chapter, we learned about first and second conjugations. So naturally, there are a lot of verbs on our list. Remember that verbs have 4 principal parts and you are responsible for knowing each one of them. So I highly recommend you get going on the memorization as soon as possible. 2 things I want to mention before we get going on the actual words. First of all, you are not required to memorize any of the supplemental vocabulary. So for example, page 7 of your textbook underneath the sententiae, and I'll wait till you pull out your textbook so that you know what I'm talking about. Page 7, sententiae, let's look at number 5 for example. Saipe peccamus. So right after that you have pecco, peccare in bold. That means that this is not an actual word on your vocab list for the chapter. You can see it's not on page 6. That's where your vocab is for the chapter. This is just supplemental vocabulary that Wheelock is giving you, and you are not required to know it unless Wheelock gives it to you in a future chapter or unless I tell you to learn it for some reason. So for right now, just focus on your core vocab that you see on page 6. The second thing I want to do or mention before we get going is pronunciation. We'll be going over pronunciation throughout the entire semester, mostly during class. But there's 2 things I want you to know right now, and that's that all C's are pronounced as hard K sounds, and all V's are pronounced as W sounds or W sounds. These are the 2 things I want you to focus on right now. If you want to get a head start on pronunciation, you can look in the introduction of the textbook on page 37. That's where it starts. And that has a comprehensive summary of how pronunciation works in Latin. As a side note, just before we keep going, these are called Roman numerals. I'm sure you've seen them at some point in your life. We'll be going over those later in the semester just to make sure everybody knows what they are and how to read them. Okay, here are the first 6 words on our list for vocab this chapter. And I put circles next to these 3 words because these are words you'll learn more about as the semester progresses. For example, me is a personal pronoun we'll learn about in chapter 11, and quid is an interrogative pronoun we'll learn about in chapter 19. But for right now, for the sake of simplicity, just translate me as me or myself in the object case. So for example, he loves me, I love myself, and translate quid as what. For example, what am I doing? Nihil is a noun, but it's more specifically what we call an indeclinable noun. That's something that won't make sense until we learn chapter 2, so for right now, ignore that and just translate it as the word nothing. For example, nothing is going on, or I am doing nothing. Non and saipe are the 2 adverbs for the chapter. We talked about them in class. And then C is the conjunction meaning if. In Wheelock, he will often include English phrases or English words in parentheses after the Latin words to help you memorize these words. So for example, annihilate, which means destroy in English, it is what we call a derivative. And what a derivative is that it has a root inside of it that is from Latin, so it's derived from Latin. In this case, nihil is the root, and so it's coming from this Latin word nihil, which means nothing. And so even though annihilate means destroy, it literally means to destroy them to the point that they're no longer in existence. They are nothing. It's a very drastic word, a very powerful word. So it's an interesting use to be able to see what the roots are and to understand what English words are really saying. 60% of our English vocabulary is derived from Latin and Greek roots, and this increases to 90% when you get into scientific and technical terminology. And so learning Latin will help you improve your English vocabulary and improve the way that you understand words, and in my mind, that is the greatest benefit of learning Latin. This is the first half of the verbs you need to memorize for this chapter. And before we get into the actual translation of them, I want to review one more time how to determine whether a verb is in first conjugation or second conjugation. So remember that first conjugation is signified by the thematic vowel long A, and that second conjugation is signified by the thematic vowel long E. So if we look at the first word on our list, amo, amare, let's pull out our second principal part, because remember the second principal part is where you go to find the base of a verb. And the second principal part is also your present active infinitive, just as a reminder. So amare, translated directly, is to love. So now let's cut off our re infinitive ending, which gives us our present stem ama, which we can further cut up into our base and our thematic vowel a. So this one is definitely in first conjugation. Now let's look at the last word on our list, moneo, monera. We go to our second principal part, cut off the re infinitive ending, divide the base from the thematic vowel, we're left with a long e, which means that one is in second conjugation. If you're having any trouble with this, come chat with me as soon as possible so that we can figure out what the problem is and you don't fall too far behind. So now looking at the actual words. Our first word is amo, amara, amawi, amatum. It means to love or like. The derivative amorous right here, the ous is a suffix that means full of, and amor means love in Latin. So someone who is amorous is someone who is full of love. Let's look at this idiom right here, amabo te, which means please in Latin. An idiom is a phrase in a language that has special meaning to that language. So for example, in English, we have the phrase basket case. A basket case is someone who's filled with anxiety, so she's a basket case. If we translated basket case directly into another language, for example Spanish, it would lose its complete sense. It would lose its meaning. And the same thing happens here. So amabo te, translated literally, is I will love you. But for the Romans, amabo te was the way that they said please. So give me that book, I will love you. So I will love you if you give me that book. That's how they thought about please. So whenever you translate a sentence and you see amabo te, use please, don't use I will love you. The next word is cogito, cogitare, cogitavi, cogitatum. This means think, ponder, consider, or plan. And the one thing I want to mention here is that even though you have 4 principal parts you need to memorize, there's a lot of repetition and patterns in these principal parts. So for example, if we look at the third principal part of amawi and the third principal part of cogitawi, we see awi and awi. Fourth principal part, autumn, autumn. So this is a pattern, third principal part awi, fourth principal part autumn, that you see in first conjugation. Not all first conjugation verbs, but the vast majority of them. So watch out for that pattern. It will help you to memorize things. The next word we have is debeo, debera, debui, debitum. It means to owe when you have an object, and it means ought, must, should when you have a complementary infinitive. So for example, to owe, it would be used in, for example, I owe money. Whereas here, ought, must, should will be used with a complementary infinitive, so it would be something like I ought to clean my room. I ought to clean or make dinner, something like that. So just watch out for that. When it's a complementary infinitive, use ought. When it's an object, use owe. And this object thing will make more sense once we get to chapter 2. I will also say, though, that this one with a complementary infinitive is the far more common use, so just remember that. It has some words like debt and duty. It has the sense of obligation in this verb. Our next word is do, dara, dedi, datum. It means to give or offer. And this is an interesting word because if you pull out the infinitive, cut off the infinitive ending, divide the base from the thematic vowel, the base is literally only the letter D. So it's kind of an interesting verb in that case. So watch out for do. The next one is ero, erara, erawi, eratum. And once again, you see the awis and the autumns, so that should help you with your memorization. And it means to wander, but if somebody wanders all over the place, the Romans said that that was erring or making a mistake or going astray, being mistaken. So for example, the derivative erratic in English is somebody who's wandering all over the place, that they're a little crazy. Kind of interesting derivative there. Laudo, laudara, laudavi, laudata means to praise. Lots of English derivatives there. And the last one is moneo, monera, monui, monitum. And it means remind, advise, or warn. So for example, a baby monitor is something that warns a parent when a baby wakes up. Or a monster, in ancient times, a monstrous, abominable, dangerous creature, was often seen as an omen or something that was warning people of danger to come. So that's how we get monster from moneo. One other thing to mention here is if you look at your third principal part, you have monui, and if you have your fourth principal part, you have monitum. And if we look over to our other second conjugation verb in this list that we have right here, you also see debui and debitum, the ui and the itum. So that's a common pattern that you see in second conjugation. So watch out for that pattern as well. It will help you. Our next verb is solveo, solvera, and it means to be well or be in good health. And notice that there is no third and fourth principal part for this one. So just memorize the first and second. And if I had the verb solveo, so just the first principal part, it would be I am well, I am in good health. If I do it in the imperative, see the imperative forms there for the singular imperative, solve, and the plural imperative, solvete, it means hello. So if I saw my friend in the street and I was a Roman, then I would say solve. And if I saw a bunch of friends, I would say solvete. It means hello. And it's kind of an interesting way to say hello, because literally what they were doing is commanding their friend, be well, friend, be in good health. And that's how they say hello. Our next verb, I'm going to put a little star by. Servo, servara, servavi, servatum. And the reason why I'm putting a star is because a lot of students think it means serve, but careful, it means save. You will learn serve later on in the semester. Servo in the first conjugation means preserve, save, keep guard, or keep or guard. And a good derivative to think of is preserve, something that you save for later on, because it's also one of the definitions possible. So watch out for that one. Conservo is essentially the exact same word except that they've added a prefix con. The prefix con can sometimes mean with, but in this case it's just being used as an emphatic prefix. So it's just you're really, really saving something. You're preserving something, conserving something, maintaining something, something like that. Kind of like the derivative conservation. Our next word right here is terreo, terrera, terui, terratum, and it means frighten or terrify. We have quite a few little derivatives from there. Oh, and I forgot to mention with servo, we saw the awies and the autumns. And here in second conjugation, we see the uis and the itums. So here's a really good example of first conjugation, typical endings for third and fourth principal parts, and for second conjugation, third and fourth principal parts. Our next word is waleo, walera, walui, waliturum. And here once again we see the ui in third principal part, and then this one's a little bit different. It's iturum. So you've got this little ur in the middle there, but it follows it otherwise. And it means be strong or have power or be well. So waleo, for example, would be I am strong, I have power. And like solve and solvete, wale and waleta is how they said goodbye, farewell. And so if you're saying goodbye to your friend, you'd say, wale friend, be strong friend, have power friend. And that's how they said goodbye. So for example, a valedictorian is somebody who speaks, dict, goodbye, who says the goodbye for everyone. Kind of a fun little derivative. Widow, widera, weedy, wisum means to see, observe, or understand. And look at this derivative, video, which is exactly your first principal part, first person singular present active indicative of the verb. Video means I see, and video is something that you watch or see. Kind of a fun little derivative there as well. And our last one right here is voco, vocare, vocavi, vocatum, which means to call or summon. And once again, we see our awi and our autumn. All right, so that is the vocabulary for chapter 1. I highly recommend you get started memorizing this stuff as soon as possible, like I said at the beginning. But for sure, make sure you know it by quiz number 1, which is next Wednesday. So the remainder of this presentation is completely optional. This is not required, but if you want some extra practice on parsing verbs, recognizing verbs, figuring out what they mean, go ahead and stay tuned. So as we discussed in class, verbs have 5 characteristics. They have person, number, tense, mood, and voice. And when I ask you to parse a verb, I'm asking you to supply this information. Tell me what a verb's person, number, tense, mood, and voice is. Now, person and number is determined by the personal endings. So we've already talked a lot about these personal endings, and you should have them memorized by now. So we have first person, second person, third person, singular, and plural for number. And the endings are o, s, t, mus, tis, and int. So that is the start. Now let's go ahead and start looking at these verbs. So our first verb is woke up. So one recommendation I have is whenever you see a verb, start dividing it up. So here we have woke as the base, we have a as our thematic vowel, so we know this is from first conjugation, and then we have a t ending. So with the t, we already know that the person and number is going to be third person singular, because that's where we find the t ending. So I'm going to write in third person singular. And then tense, mood, voice, you've really only learned one thing so far. So it's present, indicative, and active. And now let's go ahead and translate it. So third singular we know is he, she, or it. Let's go ahead and do she today. So she, and then woko wokare means to call. So she calls, she is calling, she does call. And that's how you do the first one. So let's look at the second one. Ero. Let's find the base, that is ERR, which leaves us with one letter remaining, O. So we know that O is your first person singular ending, but we don't have a thematic vowel. So for right now, let's just put first person singular, and let's try and figure out why there's not a thematic vowel. So the base is ERR, and we know from the dictionary entry, ero, errare, arawi, eratum, that this is from first conjugation. So we know that the thematic vowel is an A. And then we have O as our first person singular personal ending. As we discussed in class, this O is stronger than the A, and so the A just gets completely swallowed up, and you just get left with ero. And so that's why the A thematic vowel is gone. So first person singular, also going to be present, indicative, active. And with first person singular, remember first singular is I. And ero, errare means I wander, err, am mistaken, something like that. I'll just do I wander. I wander, I am wandering, I do wander. All right, let's do the next one. So Monet. And we know this comes from the word moneo, monera. So here's the base, mon. We know that that E right there is a thematic vowel because it comes from monera. And then there isn't a personal ending. So all we have right now is base plus thematic vowel, and that's it. We don't have anything else. So if you remember from class, when you see just the base and the thematic vowel, that is your imperative case, the command case. So go to your room, as the one I tend to choose for whatever reason. So now let's go through this. Person and number. So remember that imperative has an understood second person. When I say go to your room, I'm saying you there. You person, go to your room. And since it's Monet and not moneta, with the te plural ending, we know then it's going to be the second person singular. Tense is present. It's a present imperative. Mood, like we just talked about, is an imperative. And then voice is active. So this is the second person singular present imperative active. And to translate it, monnaie is going to be warn the people, or something like that. All right, next one. So, debemus. Now, if we just looked at this word and didn't start breaking it up, you might think that this S right here is the second person singular S ending. But if you divide it up, deb for the base, E for the thematic vowel, you understand that the personal ending is actually mus. So that's why it's really important to divide everything up. So mus is definitely the first person plural. So first person plural. And we're going to stick with our present indicative active. First person plural is translated with a we. So we, and there's two ways you can do this. We owe, like we owe money or something like that. Or we ought, ... Because remember, the complementary infinitive completes the thought. I can't just say, I ought. I have to say, I ought to do something. I ought to clean. I ought to teach. Something like that. So just remember that this is going to take the complementary infinitive in the future. All right, good. Next one, amont, base, thematic vowel. Personal ending nt is third person plural. Doing this one a little quicker. Third plural present indicative active. We know that third plural is translated as they. We know that as the base is the base for amo amare, which means to love. So they love, they are loving, they do love. Not too tricky. Last one, cogitare. Find your base, cogit. Find your thematic vowel, a. We're left with re as an ending, which isn't a personal ending, but we do know that this is the infinitive ending. And sure enough, cogito, cogitare, this is my second principal part, so this is my infinitive. So remember, infinitives have no person and number. Not at all. Because an infinitive is just to do something. It's not saying he does something, they do something. It's just to do something, to play, to sing, to teach, to walk, whatever. So we know it's an infinitive, no person and number. Tense, though, we can do present. The mood is infinitive, like we already said. And the voice is active. This is to do something, not to have been done, or something like that. So it's your present active infinitive. We know that it starts with to, and cogito, cogitare means think, so this is to think. So if I had combined cogitare with debemus, it would have been debemus cogitare. It would have been we ought, with my complementary infinitive, to think. And there's a little sentence right there. And there we have it. If you want some more practice or anything, come visit me during office hours and we could parse to our heart's content if you really wanted to. But there is the end of this presentation.